And it seems like the audience can hear us too. So welcome everyone to my session, 10 things to think about when developing an application for Microsoft Teams. My name is Yannick Reekmans and I work in Belgium as a cloud solution architect with a broad focus on the Microsoft Cloud. I also am an Office Development MVP and there I focus mainly on SharePoint and Teams. I put my Twitter handle on the slides and also the URL to my blog on the slides. So if you've got questions, reach out to me afterwards. You can reach me at on Twitter and on my blog. I also got my own Discord channel where you can post your questions. And at the end, I will hopefully cover or be able to cover them as well. So if you've got any questions, head over to Discord and find the channel there. So first of all, let's thank our sponsors again. Without them, it wouldn't be possible to have this event. And then there's this very important code of conduct. Please read it. Please adhere to it as well. We want to provide a safe space for everyone to be here in our event. So over to the agenda. The topics, first of all, an introduction, we're almost there, and then we'll get to the 10 things to think about when developing an application for Microsoft Teams. And at the end, we'll do a wrap up, and I will be giving away some stickers to people that fill in the form as well. So you want to build an application, or specifically, you want to build an application for Microsoft Teams. You've got 4 options. First of all, the ready-made solutions. Those are the applications that are already available within Microsoft Teams store. So you've got the store, you've got the applications that are put there by Microsoft and by other third-party application developers, and you just use them. But for the purpose of a session about how to build your own applications, it's not very interesting to discuss this. You also got a possibility to use the Power Platform to automate tasks and low-code applications. Now, we won't be covering much of this in this session either. So then there are the reference solutions. And the reference solutions are also known as the app templates, are available on GitHub, and they're distributed by Microsoft and the community. They're ready-made applications, but they didn't really make it into the store, but you can use them, deploy them in your own organization, use them as inspiration for your own solutions, or just use them as is. It's also not what we're going to talk about. We're talking about the custom-built applications. You just sit down from scratch, you draw something on a piece of paper, and in the end, it's supposed to end up as a team application. But before that, you need to make decisions. So let's see which decisions are most important before you start your development process. First of all, make sure that you know what problem you're trying to solve. So do you know who you want to help with this application? Every application you build has a goal. So it has an opportunity to reach out and make the life of people better, but do you really know who you want to help? And do you understand what they do and why they need your application? And do you also understand when they need it? So at which point of the day, at a specific place or a specific time. So understand your audience before you start developing this application. And make sure that you're able to describe the goal of your application in a simple, goal-oriented way. If you cannot describe in 4 or 5 sentences what your application is and what it will do or what it will try to solve, you have to rethink your idea and your goal for this application. You have to be able to tell it in an elevator. I know it's a cliche, but if you cannot get across the idea of your application in an elevator pitch, you have some work to do to get your focus and your development team's focus straight on this application. So first of all, focus on the story. Know what you want to do, what you want to achieve with your application, and not so much about your solutions, about how you want to achieve it. The actual technical implementation will come as soon as you have a clear vision on what you want to achieve. What's your story with this thing you're going to build? And then you have to be honest with yourself. So you've got an idea for an application, but does it really, really warrant custom development? So as a developer, I'm a developer as well. We know that we like to play and try out all the newest things. So we have the tendency to make up problems so that we can solve them with the best new technology available. But does that really is the best use of your time, or is it really the best thing to build an application that you just made up the problem for? And then secondly, it's about the usage time. Are you sure that your application will get enough usage that it warrants all of this time investment to build an application? Same goes for the number of users. Will you have enough users for this application to warrant all of the custom development? So in the end, it all comes down to the return on investment. Is it worth throwing all the money and all the time and all the people against solving this problem when only one person will use it for one time a year? Maybe it is, if it's a long period of time that he or she will be using the application at that one moment in time, and it returns on investment. But you have to make sure that you know all of this before you even start developing. Halfway through your development process, realizing that it might not be the best problem to solve, or it might not be the best priority now, is a kind of a disappointment for both you, your users, and your development team that you like inspired to start developing here. So you're sure you want to build this application? Now it's time to choose a Teams app capability for your scenario. So let's see which Teams app capabilities there are. First of all, you've got the Teams tabs. So it's a big canvas to host your UI. It's almost full screen inside the Teams client application. All of you know it when you use Teams. So it's the tab inside the Teams channel that shows the files, or a planner tab, or something like that. There's also bots, so you can create bots to drive engagement in a specific Teams channel or in a one-on-one conversation. So they can handle question and answer scenarios, and they can send messages on behalf of your service, for example. So these bots can increase interaction and drive engagement. Then you've got the messaging extensions. So they allow you to share rich cards for your service. For example, if you paste in a GitHub link or a link to Twitter, Teams will render not just the link, but a specific card that also already previews the information that's behind the link. And you can create things like that as well. So for your own application, for your own service, the ability to input richer cards that allow interaction, put buttons on it. So it's quite interesting to build something like this. And then you've got messaging actions, and they allow you to interpret chat. So they start basically on a message. Everyone knows on a message you can react with the emojis, but there are also the 3 dots. And in those 3 dots menu, there are a lot of actions, and you can put your own actions in there. So those are the messaging actions. You've got task modules, which is a pop-up dialog. Simply said, it can pop up from your application, ask for additional input. It's for the bigger input fields. If you need 4 or 5 fields, not just one field of information, you can use a task module. And your custom application can also send out notifications by tagging users or by injecting notifications into the notification feed of Teams. So it's up to you to decide which one will fit your scenario. You have to understand what each of them does and the possibilities that each of them bring in for your application. Now we can put them in some categories. So some of them are canvas-based and some of them are message-based. Basically, it comes down to where this or what capability this extensibility point has and where it starts. So for a tab, I already said it's a big canvas. It's almost a full screen application. It's like a website. Message-based are all those that either start from a message or send a message to your users. And then there's a third one that got announced at Ignite and is supposed to go live during October, but I'm not sure if we'll make or they will make that time frame. It's the meetings-based applications. Meetings-based applications are a bit of a combination of both, a canvas-based and message-based, because meeting-based applications come in 3 flavors. First of all, it's a pre-meeting. So before your meeting even starts, when you schedule it, you can add an application to the invitation. And when your application shows up in the invitation, it's a tab. So it uses the tabs framework. It's the simple or the same thing as if you would build a Teams tab. Now, in Meeting, you've got two options. You've got tabs and notifications. So once again, a tab is a side panel in this case, so the canvas is a bit smaller. Think about the participants list or the chat in a Teams meeting. So you've got that amount of space inside a Teams meeting, but you can also send out notifications which will pop up in the middle of the screen. And then post-meeting, we return to being a full screen tab. Your application doesn't have to cover all three of these functionalities, but those are meetings based and they can get the context of the meeting as well. So that's kind of the capabilities for a Teams application. So it's up to you to choose which you want and where it has to show. So now you chose your capability. Now you have to decide the Teams app scope for your scenario. And the app scope is either team scope or personal scope. So an application in Teams can either be for a group of people or for just one person. Now, for a group of people, your application is supposed to surface information that is relevant to that group of people, of course. So, and in the personal scope, it's supposed to show all the information that's relevant to just a specific user. Same goes for bots in both the team scope and the personal scope. A good example there is the Planner app or the recently renamed Tasks app in Teams, because when you add it to a team, it will show all the tasks that are relevant to that specific team or that group of people. But if you add it in your personal scope, it will show up in the left rail, the app rail of your Teams client, and it will surface the tasks that are relevant to you, assigned to you, or where you're collaborating. So that's kind of two functionalities combined into one, depending on the scope of your application or the scope of where the application runs. So let's look at the capabilities in each scope. And lucky us, you can have both, in both scopes, the same functionality or the same extensibility points. So you can have tabs and messaging actions, messaging extensions and bots in both the team scope and the personal scope. In the personal scope, if we talk about tabs, it's also about personal apps. So a tab in the personal scope is mostly attached to a bot. So a bot also can have additional tabs attached to it, but you can have a tab separately, standalone as a personal application. This is when you can pin it to the left rail of your Teams client. Now that you know about the scope and the extensibility points of your custom application or the one that you want to build, you have to take a good hard look if you want to go low code or full code. A couple of months ago, the scenario was a bit more in favor of full code. You develop everything yourself, but more recently, things have been changing. In favor, I don't really want to say that, but low code has become a great opportunity as well to get custom applications inside Microsoft Teams. So if we talk about full code, you either talk about Node.js with TypeScript or JavaScript or .NET Core with C# development. You start from scratch. We'll talk about that a little bit later as well. So you code everything yourself. You decide the extensibility points. You decide the functionality you want, and you're the coder. But you have to handle everything from authentication to the actual UI to the UI framework. Now with low code, you can now use Power Automate to automate a lot of tasks inside Microsoft Teams as well, with the connectors that are available and the from a selected Teams message trigger, for example, you can create your own messaging action already. You can use Power Virtual Agents and Power Apps and Power BI right inside Microsoft Teams, so you can embed your own application inside Teams using Power Apps or Power Virtual Agents for a bot. So it's become more feature-rich. While a couple of months ago, only the full code solution could have context-aware information, basically knowing I am used inside this team, so I know about this team, this channel, who's the member of this team, who's a member of this channel, who am I interacting with. All of that context information is now also available, or most of it is now also available through the low-code platform. And if you look at the low-code platform, even there, you've got two more options. So you can either go standalone Power Platform. So what we're used to for already a couple of years, build your own Power App in the Power App Studio, and you can embed it into Teams. So it's a standalone one. Now for most of that functionality, or if you need functionality, some of it is included in your Office 365 license. Some of it isn't. So for a standalone Power Platform, if you want to use CDS, for example, and the Common Data Service, you need the premium licensing. And that's where Microsoft now announced Project Oakdale since July, I think, and since Ignite in September, we can already try it out in preview, where Project Oakdale is a specific or a special kind of common data service environment that's available only for applications that are hosted in Teams. So if you use Project Oakdale, it's included in most Teams licenses. You get common data service and some of the premium features that were previously only available when you had premium licensing in the standalone Power Platform. But the limitation there is that your application, your Power Virtual Agent or your Power App can only be used inside the Teams client, either the desktop client or the mobile client. If we're looking at full code, you've got another option as well with the SharePoint framework. SharePoint framework, or SPFX, can also be used to create some of the extensibility points inside the Microsoft Teams client. You have to be aware of all the capabilities because not all extensibility points are available for SharePoint framework, but also not for the Power Platform. So you have to make sure that you make a good decision there. You find out the knowledge that you need to make the good decision there. For the rest of this session, I assume we're going full code, like the hardcore developers we all are. So we're going full code. And with full code, you have to decide on your development framework because you're not gonna write everything yourself. You want to start with some SDKs and with some pre-built interaction points that are made available by the Microsoft Teams team. So depending on the functionality that you want to build or the extensibility points of a Teams app, you get a separate or a different SDK or different options for building your or using as a development framework. So if you look at bots, you will be using the bot framework v4. That's a given, but you then can choose if you want to develop your bot in C#, in JavaScript, or in Python. And for messaging extensions, both messaging actions and the other messaging extension option, you can use as well the bot framework v4. So all messaging extensions are built on top of the bot framework v4. But if you want to create messaging extensions, you are limited to C# and JavaScript. Even though you might be an awesome Python developer and you've created your bots in Python, if you want to extend it with a messaging extension, you'll have to use C# or JavaScript. And that's just because in the Python SDK for the bot framework v4, not everything is included to build messaging extensions. And if you want to build a team step, either in the personal scope or in the team scope, and probably also in the meeting scope, you can use Node.js and React. Well, in essence, a team step is just a website that's hosted in an iframe inside the Teams client. So you can use whatever development framework you want to build a web application. Now, within the Microsoft ecosystem, we see that Node.js and React are used most next to C# and ASP.NET Core or ASP.NET MVC. Like I said, you can use whatever you want, but we see that Microsoft puts out samples mostly for these three options. So most of the applications that get built by developers also are based on top of one of these three frameworks. And then lastly, you can use the SharePoint framework, like I said. So you know what you want, how you want to build it, which development framework. Now you have to make it look nice. And you have to choose a UX framework for your application. So if you look at your UX framework, what options do you got there? So for your UX framework, first of all, the easiest one is the adaptive cards. So you can use adaptive cards to create a nice looking user experience inside the Teams client. So if we go for adaptive cards in essence are a declarative UI. So you describe what you want to see on the screen, and you don't describe the styling. So it's in a JSON object. You say, I want to see a header and 2 labels and 3 buttons with these actions behind it. And the hosting application will then render the card fitting to their look and feel. You can see on the screen that we've got some examples there. They're all the same JSON objects, so they're the same adaptive card, but depending on whether it's hosted in Skype, in Android and iOS, in Microsoft Teams, or even in the Windows native notification system, it's rendered differently. And it's up to the hosting application to style this card for you. You don't have to do anything there. Now, adaptive cards are available for messaging extensions, bots, and connectors. And they're cross-product as well. So they're not just for Teams, but you can use adaptive cards in Outlook and in other first-party and third-party products too. Don't be, well, in Teams there are 3 types of adaptive cards, or something similar to adaptive cards. Well, first of all, you've got the cards that are the Outlook cards, the Outlook connector cards. Those are the oldest technology. They are created specifically when there were only Outlook connectors, and adaptive cards is the next generation of that vision that started with the Outlook cards. And there are the simple cards that are included with the bot framework. If you decide to go with cards and this declarative UI approach, please make sure that you're using the adaptive cards, the latest one, the 3rd one, the newest generation of this declarative UI framework, because that's the one that gets the most love by Microsoft. That's the one that gets the newest innovations and the newest possibilities. All the others are there for backwards compatibility, basically. If you think, I want to build my UI from scratch, I want to build it myself. So for my Teams tab, what UX framework should I use there? Well, since a Teams tab is just a website, you can use whatever framework you like. So you can use any design or UX framework that you want, that you can find on the internet. So you've got some great frameworks like Telerik UI or Material Design by Google or anything like that. You can use it inside your Teams application. Well, that's cool, of course, but when I want my application to look like first-party applications, like they belong inside the Teams client, what do I have to do there? And then it's your lucky day, because Microsoft has a very consistent UX framework story. And I might be a little bit sarcastic here. Now, this very consistent UX framework story is called Fluent UI. Let's see what this means. What is this Fluent UI thing? So Fluent UI is a collection of UX frameworks for creating beautiful cross-platform applications that share code, design, and interaction behavior. That's an awesome marketing slogan. And from this marketing thing, you kind of think that all of these platforms and all of these like collection of UX frameworks offer the same opportunity, whether you're developing your application on web, Windows, iOS, Android, macOS, or cross-platform by using React Native. But that's kind of a disappointment there. So what they did most recently was bring all of these UX frameworks under the same brand. Currently, not the same functionality is supported on each of those platforms. Lucky for us, for a Teams tab, we're only focusing on the web. Now, on the web, it was also known, or it's also known as @FluentUI / React. So it's version v7.x of React framework, or the React functionality from Fluent UI, which is basically just a naming change from Office UI Fabric React version 7. So they took Office UI Fabric React version 7 and they renamed it to Fluent UI React. They just renamed the NPM package. that you download. Nothing else changed, it's just the same framework, which is a great set of controls, and it has the best support available. You can log tickets in GitHub. There's a big community that does all of this or follows it up, and there's a big investment for Microsoft as well inside of these or for these UX frameworks. Problem is, they don't really look like they belong in Microsoft Teams. They look like Office. They look like SharePoint. You can use them in SharePoint, and everything fits quite nicely. But Teams has a slightly different UI experience, and this Fluent UI controls don't really match Microsoft Teams. So let's see what options you've got there. First of all, the Microsoft Teams UI control library. If you look at the package on npm, you can find it with the name msteams-ui-components-react. And it has some specific controls for Teams. And it's the first UI control library Microsoft released, or the Teams product group released, for building your own applications for Teams. Now, this UI control library is still available in App Studio. For the people that are used to App Studio is an application in the Teams store that you can use to create the manifest file of your custom Teams application. And there's a tab inside the App Studio that shows the Teams UI control library. Just too bad that this thing is actually deprecated for at least, I believe, 8 to 12 months already, and it's still there in the App Studio, which is for me a shame because new Teams app developers will go into the App Studio because all the guidance says go in App Studio and find all the information in there, and then they find this out-of-date UI control library. So we've got another option, and we're back to Fluent UI. Well, kind of. So Fluent UI, this thing for Teams, is known on npm as @fluentui react-nordstar v0. And it was previously known as @fluentui react v0. And it was then previously known as Stardust UI React v0. So it went through a lot of name changes. And it's quite difficult to find because there's not much pointing there. They just took what the Teams team was doing with Stardust UI and just put it under the Fluent UI umbrella and renamed it first to React, but then they got into a problem because they wanted to rename Office UI Fabric React into React as well. So they made it Nordstar. For those that still can follow along, Nordstar is a teamable control library. And it is still the official library for Teams app development, or at least for the UI for Teams applications. Now, let's see what Fluent UI's endgame will be. The community has had big discussions with the Fluent UI team to see where Fluent UI is going and how Nordstar and the Teams application and the Teams UI fit in this story. So the goal or the end game for Fluent UI is to converge Stardust or Nordstar with the Fabric and Fluent UI. They want to pull in the concepts of Nordstar into Fluent UI, but this will happen iteratively. Now, the concepts of Nordstar that they want to include in Fluent UI specifically are the teamable options. The strong suit of Stardust or Nordstar is the fact that it's a control library, but the styling of it or the teamability of it is separate. So it's much easier to change the look and feel of a control into either an Office look and feel or a Teams look and feel. And when we're talking about the Teams look and feel, into the light mode and the dark mode of the Teams look and feel. And this concept of Nordstar has to make it into Fluent UI. We've got commitment from the Fluent UI team, only they said that this will happen iteratively. Currently, they're working on V8 of Fluent UI React, and it will not have the teamable options in there yet. So this means that for the time being, it's still Nordstar if you want your application only inside Microsoft Teams and you want it to look and feel like it belongs in Microsoft Teams. Their end goal is to unify it all. One styling solution, one theming solution, one set of utilities, one set of component authoring patterns, and one set of components on one documentation site. We'll see. And I'm very, very curious to see in what time frame they will achieve this. You've got an app, it looks nice, and now you need to handle authentication. And there as well, the story is quite separate depending on the extensibility points. So when you handle authentication for a bot, it's more difficult than for a team step. Currently, a bot requires a lot of authentication, like authentication scenarios or authentication code that you need to handle yourself, because single sign-on for bots is currently actively being worked on. It's been actively being worked on for a couple of months already, and we're not seeing major improvements. So it might take another while before we get this. Now for tabs, SSO is general available. So this means that if your team step requires your user to log in with their Office 365 credentials, you have an ability to make sure that this happens transparently for the end users. So they don't know that they're logged in into your website, or that they get logged in into your website through single sign-on. For this, you have to register an additional application in your Azure AD tenant. You have to provide that information in your app manifest for your Teams application, and then your Teams tab, or when your tab gets loaded inside the Teams client, the SSO will take place, and your users will get automatically authenticated into your Teams tab. For messaging extensions, this is even more difficult. It has to do with a post request to your endpoint, then it has to respond with the fact that it's unauthenticated. You have to provide a pop-up for authentication experiences. So think long and hard on if you need authentication in your application, and if it's really necessary for messaging extensions, because it's a lot more complex than for bots or for team steps. And one of the other things Microsoft says that you have to consider, especially if you want to distribute it worldwide, you have to consider all your user types. When we build an application for Teams, it's easiest to build for our company, for our organizational users. That's easy to do because it just works. You don't have to think about much. As soon as SSO kicked in, you know about your organizational users. But if you want your application to be usable by guest users, you need to do some specific work. And especially when we're building applications, or with the ability to build applications that extend meetings, you can also get anonymous meeting participants. So this means that your application might get used by people that aren't logged in into the Teams client, that are anonymous and that you don't have any information about. So don't go ask Microsoft Graph for information on this specific user, because Graph might not know about this anonymous meeting participant. And to handle this, make sure that you use the tenant-specific endpoints whenever possible. This means when you send out your authentication request, send it out to the specific tenant ID. This is important for guest users, for example, because a guest user is logged in into your tenant. Now, if you use the common login endpoint, the end user will be redirected there. It will see that the guest user is a guest user, but it will see that it's homed in a specific home tenant. So it will return a token for their home tenant and not for your tenant where they're a guest, which ends up providing or creating a lot of confusion and bad user experiences. And you have to provide a way to log out of your application. These are guidances that are provided by Microsoft that you have to have when you put your application through review. So I don't make these up. If you don't have this, your application will not be able to get through review and will not be able to make it to the store. And now you have to choose your tools to simplify your development process. Well, you don't have to. You can just open Visual Studio Code and start writing all of the files yourself, creating all of the files and your file structure and your project structure, build it manually, compile it, create a zip file with the manifest in, all by yourself. Now, we wouldn't be good developers if we'd do everything manually. We tend to be a kind of lazy or optimized. So we use the tools that are available and made available by the community or by Microsoft. First thing that's made available, and it exists for 3 years, I believe, is the Yeoman generator for Teams. It needs to be combined with the App Studio to provide all of the functionality or make your life simpler. So it's not one thing, but it's two. If you use the Yeoman generator for Teams combined with the App Studio, you get the ability to scaffold information or scaffold applications with tabs, bots, outgoing webhooks, connectors, and messaging extensions, but also localization. So the Yeoman generator for Teams is a Yeoman-based generator that you open up in the command prompt. It asks you questions, you answer them like, this is the name of my application, I need a tab and a bot, and it will scaffold all the necessary files in there. It will provide you with some gulp tasks to build and compile and debug your application, and in the end you end up with the thing that you need to install on your web service and a zip file with your app manifest in that you can install into the Teams client. Specifically, localization is important. We're in Belgium, or I'm speaking to mostly a Belgian and Dutch audience, I believe. And in Belgium, we've got 3 languages. Mostly we need to support Dutch and French, and then most often also English. So your application needs localization. And the Yeoman generator allows to scaffold already all the necessary files and functionality and logic to make sure that your app shows up in the user's chosen language. When you use Yeoman generator for Teams, it's node-based. It will scaffold TypeScript files, and it will include the Fluent UI React North Star components. So from the start, your look and feel will be great, and you will have a good development experience using TypeScript. Now you need the App Studio for your manifest file editing and validation. The Yeoman generator doesn't provide any UI over the app manifest, and the App Studio does. So if you combine the App Studio, you can take the zip file that's generated by the Yeoman generator, put it into the App Studio, and adjust your parameters of your application. Now, like I said, Yeoman generator exists for 3 years and is created by another MVP, Victor Willen. He has a great team working on this, and it's the best experience as far as I'm concerned for developing your Microsoft Teams applications. Now, most recently, Microsoft has put out their own generator or toolkit. For Visual Studio Code, it's called the Microsoft Teams Toolkit. It's an extension you can find in the store, and it's a bit more limited than the Yeoman generator because it can only generate tabs and bots and messaging extensions, and it can do the app validation. So it combines the functionality of the App Studio directly inside Visual Studio Code, but on the other end, you're losing the capabilities of developing outgoing webhooks and connectors, and specifically localization is missing there as well. Another downside of this Microsoft Teams toolkit for Visual Studio Code is the fact that it generates JavaScript files. I have no clue what they were thinking. The whole of Microsoft is moving into TypeScript and TypeScript-based development, and for their Teams toolkit, they decided that JavaScript files will be more than enough. You've got the same thing, or more or less the same thing, for Visual Studio. So Visual Studio also has an extension, and it's also limited to just tabs, bots, and messaging extensions. But it also includes the validation process and the app manifest editing from the App Studio directly into the Visual Studio client. This one will generate files or scaffold files of a project based on .NET Core and C#. Both of them include the Fluent UI React North Star components to deliver a nice looking look and feel, or a nice looking UI. If it's up to me for now, I'd still pick the Yeoman generator over the Microsoft provided tools. So you build your application. It's awesome. You feel very proud that everything is going smooth. You've got some testing going, and you feel like I'm ready to deliver and distribute this application. Now you have to choose a distribution method that fits the purpose of your application. So don't go publishing it worldwide when it's only meant to be used by 1 or 2 people inside your organization. So let's see which options you've got. First of all, sideloading. It's not called that way anymore. It's in all of the documentation by Microsoft, it's called allow users or allow a user to upload a custom application. Well, it's side loading. In essence, it's the ability for users to take the zip file and bypass all controls that are set on an organizational level, and you just install it directly just for you or for a specific team. And this is the goal of side loading. It's there for testing purposes and during development. It's for a way to distribute an application or use an application just for you or just for a specific team, but it means that IT has no oversight. So in most organizations, you will find that side loading is disabled and only available in development tenants. So you need to switch to another distribution method, being the tenant app catalog. The tenant app catalog shows up in the Teams store. In your Teams client, you go into the Teams store and it will say apps for your organization. This is where you will put all the applications that are developed specific for your organization. If you distribute your applications like this, it allows for your application to be used in the app permission policies and in the app setup policies. So a user that is allowed to distribute your their application into the tenant app catalog can either upload it through the Teams client and say upload for the whole organization. A global admin and a Teams administrator can use the manage apps functionality in the Teams admin center to upload this new application. And soon coming, there will be a way for a developer to submit using the Graph APIs. So they will use or be able to use the Visual Studio Code extension, the Visual Studio extension, or the App Studio inside the Teams client to say, this is my application, please, global administrator, please review it and approve it so it can be distributed to the organization. This is especially useful when your developers inside in a big company don't know who the global administrator or the Teams administrators are. Now, the app permission policies allow you to say who can use your application. So if it's an application specifically for HR, scope the usage to the HR department. The same for app setup policies. This is a policy that allows you to say, for this group of people, we will pre-install this application and we will already pin it to the left rail. That means that when you install it on a Friday, next Monday morning, people come into the office, start the Teams client, and they already have your new shiny application pre-installed for them and in their left rail. Up until now, it's only possible to install an application or pre-install an application for users. Very, very soon, it will also be possible to install or pre-install it into specific teams. And then last but not least, conquer the world. Your application is so awesome. Everyone all over the world has a use for it. So you want to distribute it worldwide. You want to be in the app catalog inside the Teams client. Well, Microsoft has a thing for that. It's called the App Source. You put your application in there and the whole world will be able to install it. This way you can expand your app audience to 75 million Teams daily active users. So if you want a big user base, App Source is the way to go. Problem there, you have to go, well, it's not a problem, but it's a challenge. You have to put your application through a thorough review process. Microsoft provides a submission checklist up front, some validation tools as well. You have to get publishing permissions into the Partner Center, which means you first have to become a Microsoft partner. You need an MPN ID before you can distribute your application. And they say officially you need to give them at least 2 weeks for your submission to be reviewed and published. Now, from personal experience and from experience of people that I talked to, this seems to go from 2 weeks to 3 months, and mostly pushing the 3 months boundary before your application ends up in App Source. This means that you need to take enough time or give it enough time, foresee enough time to go through, but also effort to go through this review process. It's a lot of back and forth. But if you want to do this and you want to reach 75 million Teams daily active users, it might be worth it for you. And now your application is distributed and my work is done here. So that brings me to the end of the session. There is a resources slide that covers resources for all of the scopes or all of the steps that I talked about. I will be distributing the slide deck through my blog and maybe also through the organizational. I'm not sure. I'll ask Thomas after the session. So you can find it on my blog probably by the end of today. And that leaves me with just thanking you for joining. You were an awesome audience, although I couldn't see you or hear you, but I saw some interaction happening in the Discord channel, so thank you for that. If you've got questions, feel free to reach out on that Discord channel or on my Twitter or my blog. And I'm giving away stickers, so for all of those that like stickers from Pimp Your Own Device, fill in the form at the link that's on the slide there, and I will send you 2 stickers, so licensing killed or user adoption, and I hate stickers because I don't put stickers on my laptop. I seem to be the exception for that. And you get the ability to pick up on up to 2 additional free stickers, and you can add, of course, whatever more stickers that you like, but those you'll have to pay for yourself. So that's it. Let's check the Discord channel if there are any questions. No more questions. So thank you very much. I think, Thomas, I made it almost within time. So
absolutely, yeah.
There was still muted, or at least I cannot hear you. I see you talking.
Oh, great. No.
Nope.
And no one can hear me. Oh, fantastic. Okay, sorry. All right.
No, sorry. I'll try to fill. I keep talking until. Oh, so Paulo can hear you. I cannot hear you. So that's weird.
Yeah, great. Okay, yeah. I'm sorry. We'll have to switch. Thank you.
The Omita framework is an enterprise-ready software platform that makes it possible to set up an easy integration between your existing back-office applications and push all the relevant information into digital workplaces. Omita has developed various kinds of solutions which can be easily deployed and linked to your back-office applications. Omita has solutions for contract management, HR, to speed up onboarding and offboarding processes, sales dashboards, shop floor portals, and many more. If you want more information, visit our website.